What would you do if, on the eve of your wedding, your own sister stood up and bragged about once dating your fiancé? And when your fiancé finally snapped, your father, your only parent left, sided with her, threatening not to walk you down the aisle unless you apologized? Would you sacrifice your dignity to keep the peace, or risk standing alone on the most important day of your life? My sister bragged about dating my fiancé at my wedding. I never imagined the week of my wedding would begin with a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I'd endured before. Picture this. You are standing in a room filled with people who should be celebrating your love, your joy, your future, and instead all eyes keep drifting to someone else. Not the bride, not the groom, but my half-sister, Maddie, and what she was saying, over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, Dran warmly welcomes you. Tonight, I'll share a story that begins with something so unsettling, so humiliating, that I nearly lost control of the very day I had dreamed about since I was a girl. And here's the question I want you to hold in your mind as you listen. What would you do if your own sister tried to ruin your wedding by bragging that she once dated your fiancé? It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? Yet that was my reality. Maddie had gone out with Jake 6 years ago. 2 dates. Forgettable, meaningless, almost comical in how unimportant they were. But somehow, she turned those 2 awkward nights into the centerpiece of my engagement, whispering it at parties, weaving it into conversations, laughing like it was some inside joke the rest of us were too blind to get. Imagine standing there in your own dress rehearsal for the happiest day of your life, while your sister smirks and says, "Well, I remember when Jake used to..." with me. What was she trying to prove? That she had him first? That she still held some power over him? Or was it about me, her older sister, who she'd never quite forgiven for existing in the same orbit as her father's love? I didn't know. What I did know was that each word she spoke dragged me deeper into a storm I hadn't asked for. Here's where the mystery begins. Why did she keep doing it? Why did my father, who knew exactly how strained our relationship was, insist she be invited in the first place? And why, out of all the days she could choose, did she decide my wedding was the perfect battlefield to settle whatever grudge she held inside? These were the questions clawing at my mind as I stood there trying to smile for guests while my stomach knotted tighter and tighter. You see, I had promised myself not to give her the satisfaction. Jake and I had agreed to ignore her jabs, to let them slide into the background. After all, silence is sometimes the sharpest weapon. You starve a person of the attention they crave, and eventually they stop. At least, that's what we thought. But Maddie didn't stop. She pressed harder. She wanted me humiliated. She wanted Jake cornered. And she wanted to see what we would do if she refused to let go. And here's the cruel irony. The more I tried to keep peace, the more she thrived. Every time I looked away, she leaned in closer to the people around her. Every time Jake tightened his jaw in restraint, her grin widened, as though she'd won some invisible prize. It wasn't just about the past. It was about control, dominance, attention. By the time we reached the rehearsal dinner, the tension was a living thing in the room. Maddie cracked another joke, this time too sharp, too mocking, and Jake snapped. He turned on her, his voice carrying across every table. "There's a reason I stopped seeing you. You were clingy. You were obsessive. You were creepy." He didn't stop there. He told the story of how she'd called his mother after barely 2 dates, desperate to force a closeness that wasn't there. His words sliced through the air like glass shattering. And in that instant, my world spun upside down. Maddie burst into tears, ran from the room, and every head turned to me. Some eyes were sympathetic, others were horrified. But it was my father's eyes that cut deepest. He stood, furious, and declared that unless Jake and I apologized, he would not attend my wedding. He would not walk me down the aisle. My father, my only parent left. On the eve of my wedding, he chose sides, and it wasn't mine. Now tell me, what would you have done? Would you have apologized to keep the peace, even when you knew you were right? Would you sacrifice your dignity for the sake of avoiding conflict? Or would you risk losing your father on the most important day of your life? This was the impossible choice laid before me. The MacGuffin of my story wasn't money, wasn't an object. It was my wedding itself. The one day meant to symbolize love and unity had become a battlefield of loyalty, resentment, and betrayal. The question of who would walk me down the aisle wasn't just tradition. It was the heartbeat of my family, torn in two. And that, dear listeners, is only the beginning. Because the night before my wedding, I was forced to ask myself a question I never wanted to face. If my father could turn his back on me so quickly, what did that say about our bond? And if Maddie could twist a meaningless fling into a weapon, what else was she capable of? Stay with me, because what happened next changed not only the course of my wedding, but the course of my family forever. A warm thank you for listening, and if you don't want to miss the rest of this story, the choices, the betrayals, the revelations that followed, make sure to subscribe to Dran. Your support keeps us bringing you more of these true, raw stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. My father demanded I apologize or lose him on my wedding day. When my father's voice cut through the room, declaring that unless I apologized, he would not walk me down the aisle, I felt the ground slip beneath me. This was not just a threat, it was a verdict. I stood frozen, every eye on me, my heart pounding with disbelief. How could he side with Maddie after everything? How could he not see what she was doing? I returned to my room that night with my thoughts in chaos. My wedding day was less than 24 hours away, yet instead of picturing flowers and music, all I could see was an empty aisle. I imagined my father's seat vacant, the whispers rushing like poison through the crowd. She lost her father's blessing. How could I bear that? The questions gnawed at me. Should I swallow my pride, apologize to Maddie, and pretend none of this ever happened? Would it really matter if I surrendered just one time, if it meant having my father by my side? But then another voice pushed through. If I apologized, wouldn't I be betraying myself? Wouldn't I be teaching Maddie that she could manipulate, humiliate, and still win? Morning came with no answers. My father came to me again, quieter but with the same cold determination. "You need to apologize," he said, his eyes heavy. "If you don't, I can't stand with you tomorrow." His words landed like stones. I searched his face for the man who used to fight to keep me on weekends, the man who swore I was as important as Maddie. But the man before me was different, harder, unreachable. And for the first time, I saw that he wasn't asking. He was demanding. "I can't," I whispered, though my throat burned. "I can't apologize for something I didn't do." His silence was worse than shouting. He looked at me as if I had already failed him, as if I was the one breaking this family apart. And then he turned away. Was I really watching my father walk out of my life the night before my wedding? I found Jake later, steady as ever. His hand gripped mine. "We can't give in," he said. "If he chooses to leave, that's on him, not us." His calmness was a lifeline, yet terrifying all the same. Could I truly bear it if my father abandoned me on the most important day of my life? Could I stand there, beautiful but broken, without him? Time dragged. Every hour waited with dread. Maddie stayed locked in her room, feeding her victimhood while I battled with myself. In my mind, two paths unfolded. In one, I bent, offered Maddie the apology she craved, and carried the shame with me forever. In the other, I held firm, walked down the aisle alone, and lost my father's presence. Both futures felt unbearable. And yet, as the day waned, clarity came. This wasn't about Maddie anymore. It was about me, my dignity, my right to protect the sanctity of my wedding. If I yielded now, what would that say about me? What would it teach Maddie? That cruelty is rewarded? That attention-seeking triumphs? No, I could not let that be my legacy. So I made my choice. If my father truly meant to abandon me, then I would walk myself down the aisle. I would not apologize. I would not fold. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of my marriage, and I would not start it with compromise that cost me my self-respect. But one question still hovered like a shadow over me. When I finally faced my father again, would he truly carry out his threat? Would he leave his daughter standing alone at the altar? Or would he see, at last, that this was the moment to choose which daughter he would stand beside? That answer would come soon enough. The truth finally came out, and Maddie wasn't the victim. The silence around Maddie's locked hotel room was deafening, but outside those walls, the tension only grew sharper. People had begun whispering. first behind napkins, then in bolder voices. Friends, cousins, even Jake's parents leaned toward me and confessed what I already knew. Maddie had been the one stirring the fire all along. Every sly comment, every smug grin, every reminder of a fling that never mattered. It hadn't gone unnoticed. She wasn't the victim. She was the storm. And yet, why did my father still cling to the belief that I was in the wrong? Why did he demand an apology from me when the truth was plain in every witness's eyes? Could he not see it? Or did he simply not want to? That evening, as I paced the corridor, a cousin pulled me aside. "We've all seen what she's doing," she whispered. "Don't let her break you." The words comforted me, but also sharpened the weight of what lay ahead. Because if others could see Maddie's games, then my father's blindness was no accident. It was a choice. And if he was choosing to ignore it, then what else was he willing to sacrifice to protect her? Later, Jake and I sat in the quiet of our room. His calmness was a thin rope holding me above despair. "She wanted a reaction," he said. "She wanted attention. And when she finally got called out, she crumbled. That's not our fault." His voice was steady, but my pulse raced. Wasn't it easier for him? He wasn't the one whose father might vanish from the aisle. He wasn't the one who had spent years trying to stitch together scraps of loyalty from a man divided between two families. Still, he was right about one thing. Every word he had said to Maddie at that dinner was true. Her obsession had been the reason their fling ended. Her desperation had been the reason he'd backed away. And now, years later, she was playing the same game, overstepping boundaries, demanding space that wasn't hers. Could I really be expected to apologize for exposing a truth she had always refused to face? But here's the twist. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this was bigger than Maddie. It wasn't about 2 dates 6 years ago. It wasn't even about Jake's anger. It was about control. Maddie craved it. My father enforced it, and I was expected to surrender to it. That realization lit a fire in me. For so long, I had been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the daughter who didn't stir waves. But now I saw clearly. Silence had only made Maddie louder. Restraint had only made her bolder. Ignoring her hadn't starved her. It had fed her. Wasn't this the moment to break that cycle? Wasn't this the time to prove that I would not be anyone's pawn, not hers, and not my father's? So when my father asked again for an apology, I answered with a voice I barely recognized as my own. "No, if you want to walk away, then walk away, but I won't apologize for defending my own wedding." The words left my lips like stones cast into a still lake, sending ripples I couldn't take back. He stared at me, stunned. For a moment, I almost faltered, almost reached for the girl inside me who still wanted her father's approval. But then I saw it. Hesitation in his eyes, doubt flickering where certainty had lived. Had I just cracked something in him? Was the grip Maddie held over him loosening even slightly? The air between us thickened. And yet, I felt lighter. The choice was no longer his to make. It was mine. If he walked away, he would carry the guilt. If he stayed, it would be on my terms. For the first time, I wasn't a child begging for his validation. I was a woman standing in the doorway of her own life. But make no mistake, the room was still heavy with unanswered questions. Would he really leave me abandoned on my wedding day? Would Maddie twist this into another tale of victimhood, one that painted me as cold and ungrateful? And if so, who would he believe? Me, or the daughter who had mastered the art of playing wounded? The night closed in, but instead of fear, I felt the burn of defiance. Maddie's tears had been her weapon, but my resolve would be mine. Tomorrow, the aisle would still be there, whether I walked it with my father, with Jake, or alone. And perhaps that was the most terrifying thought of all, that my wedding day was no longer about vows and flowers, but about which truths would finally stand exposed under the weight of all those watching eyes. Would my father see the truth? Would Maddie finally face it? Or would I have to carry the burden of standing against them both? The answers waited in the hours ahead, and the clock was already ticking toward the moment none of us could avoid. The moment my father had to choose nexus. The confrontation I had been dreading finally came. Not with shouting, but with a silence so heavy I could barely breathe beneath it. My father asked to see me again, his face lined, his shoulders bent in a way I had never seen before. For a moment, he looked less like the man who had raised me, and more like someone cornered, burdened, carrying a weight too large to bear. I braced myself for another ultimatum. My chest tightened, waiting for him to repeat his threat, to hammer once more on the word apology. But what he said instead was different. His voice was low, stripped of its fire. He admitted he had been wrong. He said the words I had thought I would never hear, that he had spoken out of instinct, that he had acted blindly, and that it had been unfair to me. For an instant, my heart surged with relief, but almost immediately suspicion crept in. Was this real? Or was he simply trying to smooth things over to avoid losing face at the wedding? Could I trust these words when only hours ago he had been ready to abandon me at the altar? My emotions swung violently between hope and fear. Then came the twist that left me reeling. He told me he had already asked Maddie to leave, that morning, long before he spoke to me. While I had been battling with myself, imagining an aisle empty of his presence, he had been confronting her behind closed doors. He said he had tried to reason with her, begged her to apologize, and when she refused, when she lashed out at him with accusations, he finally told her she needed to go. I stared at him, caught between disbelief and the urge to cry. He had chosen me. Quietly, without fanfare, without announcing it to the world, he had taken my side. He had defended me in the one way that mattered most, by drawing a line against the chaos Maddie had brought. But why hadn't he told me sooner? Why had he let me sit with my fear, my anguish, believing I might face my wedding alone? His answer broke me and healed me all at once. He said he hadn't wanted to come to me until he was sure. Until Maddie was gone, her bags packed, her protests spent. He said he couldn't bear to face me with promises he might not be able to keep, and so he had waited. He had let me suffer in silence, yes, but it was because he wanted to come to me with certainty, not half-truths. Relief crashed over me, hot and overwhelming, and yet it was tangled with sorrow, with exhaustion, with the memory of every hour I had doubted him. I felt like I was standing on a cliff's edge, the ground steady at last beneath my feet, but the memory of nearly falling still sharp in my body. As he spoke, I saw the toll it had taken on him. He wasn't just my father defending one daughter over another. He was a man torn in two, forced to make a choice he had avoided for years. And in the end, he had chosen me. I wanted to weep, to forgive him, to collapse in gratitude, but another part of me still trembled with fear. If he could be swayed so easily once, could it happen again? Could Maddie claw her way back into his loyalty, dragging me into another battlefield down the line? That uncertainty lingered even as hope bloomed in me. Because for the first time in days, the picture in my head shifted. I could see myself in my wedding dress, walking down the aisle not alone, but with his hand steadying me. The possibility filled me with both joy and terror, as though believing it too strongly might make it disappear. And yet, when he looked at me and said, "I want to walk you down the aisle, if you'll still let me," I knew the answer was yes. How could I deny him when this was the moment I had begged for all along? How could I cling to bitterness when he had finally crossed the line and stood on my side? Still, the echo of everything we had endured remained. The twist wasn't just that Maddie had been sent away. The twist was that my father, who I thought had abandoned me, had in fact been fighting a battle of his own, one I hadn't seen, one he had chosen to shield me from until the very end. If you've been moved by this moment, if you've felt the pull of relief and fear tangled together in the same breath, please consider giving this video a like. It may seem like a small action, but for us, it's a huge encouragement that fuels our passion to bring you even more captivating real-life stories. Because this wasn't the end. The aisle still awaited. The vows still unspoken. And while I now had my father by my side, the cracks left behind by Maddie's departure, and the war it had ignited in our family, were far from healed. The wedding would be saved, but the cost had only begun to reveal itself. A wedding saved, but a family cracked ever since. The morning of my wedding arrived with a stillness that felt unreal, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When my father knocked softly on the door and offered me his arm, my chest tightened with emotions I couldn't name. Gratitude, relief, but also the raw memory of how close I had come to losing him. The walk down the aisle was everything I had dreamed of. Guests rising, the music swelling, the air electric with love. Yet beneath the joy was a quiet ache, a reminder of the battle it had taken to get here. As I looked at Jake waiting at the altar, I felt the weight of the storm we had survived together. Maddie was gone, but the shadow of her presence lingered. My father squeezed my hand before letting me go, his whisper barely audible, "I'm sorry, truly." Those words, so simple, were the ones I needed most. I believed him, and for that moment, as vows were spoken and promises sealed, I allowed myself to be fully happy, but weddings end. The guests leave, the flowers wilt, and the questions left unspoken return to fill the silence. My father went home to face the fury of his wife and the bitterness of Maddie. I went home to begin a new life with Jake. And though the ceremony had been saved, the fractures in my family widened in the weeks that followed. My father's wife accused me of tearing their household apart. Maddie vanished into her own resentment, convinced she had been betrayed. There were nights when guilt tugged at me. Had I done the right thing by standing firm? Had I demanded too much from my father? But then I would remember the look in his eyes when he chose me, the strength it took for him to tell Maddie to leave. Sometimes love doesn't look like perfect harmony. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. And sometimes it means choosing one truth over another, even when both cut deep. What surprised me most was how my father responded to the aftermath. Instead of burying his head in the sand, he faced it. He chose counseling, sitting across from his wife and speaking words he had avoided for years. He admitted his faults, his blind spots, his failures. For the first time, he was trying to repair the damage not by hiding it, but by confronting it. That gave me hope. Hope that maybe, even after all the fractures, healing was possible. And what about me? I learned something I will never forget. You cannot let anyone else write the story of your happiness. Not a sister with grudges, not a parent with blind spots, not even the voices of your own doubt. You must stand in your truth, even if it shakes the ground beneath you. Because if you surrender your dignity once, you'll spend a lifetime wondering if it was ever really yours to begin with. So yes, my wedding was saved. But more importantly, I was saved from the trap of believing I had to please everyone else at the expense of myself. The photos may show a smiling bride, a proud father, a joyful groom, but behind them lies a deeper truth. Love is never simple. Families are never perfect, and strength is often born from the moments we fear most. As I share this with you, I wonder, how many of you have faced that same choice between keeping the peace and keeping yourself whole? How many of you have stood at the edge of surrender and asked, do I bow or do I stand tall? I can tell you this, standing tall is terrifying, but it is also liberating. It cost me more than I imagined, but it gave me something priceless in return. If you've journeyed with me through this story, if you felt even a fraction of the tension, the sorrow, and the hope that carried me to this point, then I ask you this small favor. Please consider subscribing to this channel. It may feel like a small action to you, but for us, it is a huge encouragement. It fuels our passion to bring you more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable. In the end, my wedding wasn't just the union of two people. It was the moment I realized that love, in all its forms, is complicated. Sometimes it demands forgiveness. Sometimes it demands defiance. And sometimes it demands that we accept both, carrying joy and pain in the same heartbeat. That is the truth I walked away with, the truth I carry now into my marriage, my family, and my life. And maybe if there is anything I want you to take from my story, it is this. Never let anyone convince you that your voice is too small, your worth too fragile, or your choices too selfish. You are allowed to protect your happiness. You are allowed to demand respect. And you are allowed to say, this is my life, and I will not let it be rewritten by anyone else. That is what I learned, standing at the altar with my father by my side, knowing how close I had come to standing there alone. It was a victory. Yes, but one tempered with scars, one laced with lessons I will carry for the rest of my days. And as I look ahead, I do so with a heart both humbled and strengthened. Because sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that teach us who we truly are. Looking back on this story, what strikes me most is not just the conflict itself, but the way it forced every hidden tension in my family into the light. A wedding, supposed to symbolize unity and celebration, became the very stage where fractures, insecurities, and old wounds revealed themselves. It showed me that family is rarely as simple as the pictures we take to remember them by. Behind every smile can lie years of unresolved jealousy, unspoken comparisons, and loyalty pulled in two directions. Yet it also revealed something powerful, that we are not powerless in the face of these storms. When pushed into a corner, when asked to betray my own dignity to keep the peace, I realized that silence is not always golden. Sometimes silence allows the wrong people to grow louder. Sometimes appeasement only encourages manipulation. The hardest decision I made was not about flowers, seating charts, or vows. It was about refusing to surrender myself, even if it meant standing alone. There were moments of terror, moments where I thought the cost would be unbearable, losing my father on the most important day of my life. But in the end, it was by standing firm that I gained not just his presence at the altar, but his respect. And while Maddie's actions caused fractures that will take years to heal, they also exposed truths that needed to surface. We cannot build lasting happiness on foundations of denial. The truth, however painful, is the only soil where growth can take root. The lesson here is one that extends far beyond weddings or family drama. It is this: never trade your self-respect for temporary harmony. Do not allow guilt or manipulation to silence your truth. It might cost you something in the moment: approval, peace, comfort. But in the long run, it preserves the one thing you cannot afford to lose: yourself. And when you stand tall in that truth, you might be surprised who eventually chooses to stand beside you. So how do we apply this to our lives today? By recognizing the moments when we are asked to compromise our dignity and choosing instead to protect it. By understanding that saying no is not selfish, it is sometimes the most courageous form of love, both for ourselves and for those who truly care about us. And by remembering that conflict, while painful, can also be the spark that forces change, honesty, and growth. If you've found resonance in this story, I invite you to join the Dran community, where we share more real and gripping journeys that uncover the truths behind human relationships. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. It may feel like a small gesture, but for us, it's a huge encouragement and the driving force that helps us bring you more heartfelt, captivating stories in the future.